I always say, even if you are planning for the hospital, and I think that's great, wherever you feel comfortable is where you should be, I still recommend going and interviewing an out-of-hospital midwife. I think it might blow your mind, and you do not have to stay with them. I want you to hear what it sounds like and what it feels like to have somebody believe in your body and the process of birth. Just a different perspective. It'll blow your mind. But it'll have you leaving there like so confident, like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea that other people saw it this way. And it is a boost of confidence, 100%. Getting pregnant and giving birth are two of the most exciting things you can ever hope to experience in this life. The moment you think you could be pregnant, you're frantically searching for all the best information, which is why you're here today. I'm Stephanie King, and with my many years of experience as a professional childbirth educator, doula, and lover of all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, I'm here to make preparing for your birth enjoyable, empowering, and totally easy. Each week, I'll cover different topics, interview professionals, and get into the nitty-gritty birth stories from mamas just like you. And when you're ready for more, you can join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I take you step by step through exactly how to prepare your mind, body, spirit, and partner for a birth you love. So let's get started. Okay, possibly the best review title ever, 1 million stars. So thank you, Katie Klukas, for writing that. But she says, I am 17 weeks pregnant with my first, and this podcast is all caps, exactly what I've been looking for. It's so hard to know what to trust and which ones are worth your time, but as soon as I listened to the first episode, I knew this is what I've been looking for. The first one I listened to was the one about unmedicated birth, and it made me so excited. I already feel more empowered and ready to ask the right questions and figure out what's best for me after one 50-minute episode. I look forward to my walks and downtime 100 times more now, specifically because of this podcast. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Katie. That is awesome. I'm so glad. I love that I get to be in your ears while you guys are doing all the things. That's exactly what I do with my podcast too. I pop it in, I do the dishes, I ignore my kids, I listen to my kids, and then I rewind and do it again. And it's awesome. So I'm glad that I get to be that little bug in your ear, hopefully saying all the right things to you right now. This week's episode is all about VBAC. You can birth your baby vaginally if you have had a prior cesarean, and I want to tell you why. So if you know anything about me, this is near and dear to my heart because I am a VBAC mama. Now, I want to be really clear that I think my very first cesarean was entirely unnecessary. That is my personal, professional, but not as a doctor opinion. I think my situation went south probably because of some medical influence that I had during that time. And I don't think that first cesarean was necessary at all. I think it became necessary as we started doing things to get my body to go. And as my baby was not reacting well to the Pitocin, then we had a baby in distress. And yes, at that point, it was necessary. But I think we could have completely avoided having a cesarean in the first place. That said, that was my very first birth experience. And so I knew immediately that I wanted to be able to have a vaginal birth after cesarean. And I have been blessed to be able to have 2 of them. My second was born I did use an epidural. I did utilize an epidural with my second, but he was born vaginally and it was wonderful. I mean, I joke that like it was just such a different experience. I could sit up in the bed right away and I could hold my own baby and I could walk around the room and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like so awesome. And then my third baby, as you guys may or may not know, was born at home, completely unmedicated, around family, and just beautiful. It was life-changing. It's why I do what I do today, because I was like, if I can do this with all of the odds stacked against me, with all the doctors that told me I shouldn't be and couldn't be doing this, and then I did it, I knew that other women needed to know that they could do it too. And that's why I do what I do today. So I want you to know it is not once a cesarean, always a cesarean, even if that's what you're being told. I think what women don't understand is once you have a cesarean, you kind of get categorized. You get put in this little box by providers, and maybe some consciously, maybe some subconsciously. But where providers, they just put you in this high risk category. It's just where you're at, unless you find one that doesn't. And that's really like the main, what you need to be doing when you are going for a VBAC. If there were ever a time that your provider was important, it is then. And it's always important, and it's important for everyone. And if you've had a VBAC, you have to find a supportive provider. You have to. Otherwise, you're going to be up. It's just an uphill battle. It's tricky. In most cases, you can have a VBAC after a cesarean. I'll cover some instances where that's not the case, but I want you to know that it is actually less risky and safer to have a vaginal birth after cesarean than to have a repeat cesarean. And so we're going to dive into some of that today. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about what makes a good VBAC candidate, what are some risks and what are some benefits, how to prepare your body, and my very best tips to get in charge of and have an excellent VBAC for yourself. Now, many women are never given the option for VBAC. So if you're here today, that's not going to be you because you know it's totally an option. So either the provider doesn't mention it to them or they're just flat out against it. Either one of those things can happen. Again, if that's you, you need to find a new provider right away. And the funny thing is you might have a provider, maybe it's even the same provider. Maybe you had a cesarean with this provider and you go back to them and you didn't know that they weren't going to be all gung-ho for you to have a VBAC, and you find out at that appointment. Or you are with a new provider and same thing, like you don't realize until you're there and talking about VBAC that some providers are very like, oh, hot stove, I can't touch that. So you're just going to have to kind of figure that out. But as always, right, you want to do everything that you can to find a good provider. And that's going to look like asking a lot of questions, not just to the provider, but asking around the community, finding moms that have had VBACs, asking your local doulas and childbirth educators. Those are going to be your golden tickets. How, which providers do you guys recommend? Maybe even looking into an out-of-hospital provider, like a certified professional midwife. That is something that I did, and it was wonderful. So those are all options that you have. But yes, you're going to have to find a really supportive provider. I do think there's a lot of fear mongering that happens around VBAC. So you need to be aware of that just before you even get started looking. Now, women who attempt a VBAC, or sometimes it's called a trial of labor after cesarean, have a 70 to 75% chance of achieving that goal. So what you'll hear a lot of the times is the other side of the percentages, right? Like 25%, you're not going to be able to do it, or 20% or whatever it is. And I want you to know that 75% are successful when they give it a try. And so that is encouraging. You can certainly be at the upper spectrum of that or even higher than that 75%. Specifically, if you follow the advice we're going to go over here today, but it's all about preparing your mind and body too. It's not just the trying of it, it's the preparing and understanding the why behind it and how to do it right. And of course, that provider is going to be huge. So let's dive into some benefits and risks of attempting a VBAC versus a repeat cesarean. Probably one of the biggest risks that you hear about, or the most common one, is uterine rupture, right? If you attempt this VBAC, are you going to open up like at the incision site, or is your uterus going to open up at the incision site and rupture? I want to be clear that uterine rupture can happen with or without a cesarean. Yes, it does increase with each cesarean, the risk for that rupture, but particularly with only having one cesarean, if that is you, that risk is pretty low. And it's really, really close to if you never had a cesarean at all, with it being one cesarean. So I definitely want to put that out there. It's important to understand that not all uterine rupture is life-threatening. There are different degrees of uterine rupture, and that includes it's not always life-threatening to the baby, and it's not always life-threatening to the mother. So that's important to note in there as well. The rate of rupture is 0.4%. which equates to 1 in 240 births. And of the women who experience rupture, 0 to 2.8% of them resulted in perinatal death. So some did not. There is a risk. Risk factors for uterine rupture include like having a medical induction. So when you're utilizing cervical ripeners, hopefully your provider knows not to do this, but obviously you're not going to use things like Cytotec or other ripeners when you have a prior cesarean birth, because that can increase the risk of rupture. and when you have less than 18 months in between pregnancies. But again, that's going to be a personal choice. And I will tell you for myself, I have about 14 months between each child. And that ended up being fine for me. I'm not going to say because I did it, it's safe for you or anything like that. I'm just sharing my experience. So it's very personal, but know that your provider, they might have something to say about that. And so, but if you give it a little bit more time, it's supposed to be just a little bit more safer. So be aware of that. But I think family planning is just so personal that it's good information, but it's always your personal choice on what you're going to do. Uterine scar separation is another concern. And that some of the risks involved with that have to do with the number of previous cesareans you've had. So I was talking about, right, like the risk is less with one. There are women who have given birth vaginally after 2, 3, even 4 cesarean births. So that is, something for you to take into account for yourself and with a competent provider. The type of uterine scar. So was it a lower incision? Was it a T incision? How the incision was closed, if it was a single or double closure, and the time interval before the prior cesarean and laboring for a VBAC. So kind of like we talked about, if you've got that 18 months or less or more, whatever that looks like. And again, if any induction agents were used, because that can increase the risk of rupture. All right, let's talk about some numbers. So the average perinatal mortality rate in the United States is 5.54 per 1,000 babies. Neonatal mortality rate is 5.6 per 1,000 in birth, and that makes the risk of babies dying from uterine rupture less than the risk of babies dying from any other complication that might arise during pregnancy and birth. With that, I hope that gives you a little bit of comfort knowing that what you're doing for your baby, should you choose to have a vaginal birth after cesarean, and for yourself, is not unsafe. You are not doing anything out of the realm of safety, provided that, your particular situation and for yourself, everything else looks good. That alone is not posing this, massive risk. You're not a bad mom for wanting to do this. So I think it's important for you to know that. Now, let's talk about some benefits, because obviously there are great benefits to VBAC as well. You have a decreased maternal morbidity. So mom is less likely to lose her life attempting a VBAC than having a repeat cesarean. When we're talking about cesarean, it is a full surgical procedure. It's surgery in your abdominal area. You have risks that include infection and loss of blood. Those are kind of like our big main ones that they're looking at, and that's obviously much more likely with a repeat cesarean birth. You have an easier and quicker postpartum recovery. I shared my experience with you. If you've had a cesarean before and that's all you've had before, and then you have a vaginal birth, you're just going to be blown away by your recovery. It's just night and day. With a cesarean birth, it definitely, because you've had surgery, right? Coughing, sneezing, moving, walking, like everything just takes a little bit more time and is a little less comfortable. And then it just takes you a while to feel like yourself as well. Plus, you might be on some pain meds, or at least really dealing with pain in recovery, on top of trying to breastfeed a newborn and not getting any sleep. So that's all fun. So yes, easier and quicker postpartum recovery. And then you also have a shorter hospital stay. So I was actually surprised at how quickly they sent me home, even after having my cesarean. I think it was like 3 days and you're home. And I remember thinking, I have no idea what I'm doing with that little baby. So why are you sending me home? And also, like, I can't even take care of myself. Like, how am I supposed to take care of myself and this little baby? So that always felt like not enough time to me. But when I had my baby's vaginal birth after cesarean, well, at least the one I had in the hospital, I was like, get me out of here. We were gone in less than 24 hours and it was awesome. So definitely a shorter stay. You have a decreased risk of placenta increta, and that's when the placenta becomes embedded into the uterine wall. You have a decreased risk of placenta percreta, when the placenta grows through the uterine wall and might attach to other abdominal organs. So again, this is involving repeat cesareans. The more you do this, the more that these things increase. And then placenta accreta, and that's where the placenta grows into the uterine wall. So all of the things with the placenta become a little bit easier if we can avoid cesarean birth. And then there's a decreased risk of asthma and other lung problems for the baby as they grow. And I may have mentioned that earlier on this episode. I think I did, but I know I've said it before, if not. But when baby goes through the vaginal canal, there are so many things that happen along the way. And one of them is called the fetal ejection reflex. And with an intact perineum, this is one of the reasons we say don't do an episiotomy unless absolutely necessary. And even then, it's probably a little controversial. Was it really necessary or not? But as your perineum is intact and that baby squeezes through, it puts pressure on the baby's lungs and just the chest area in general. And they expel all of that fluid in their lungs in a way that they can't do if they are born via cesarean. We can do some suction, they can kind of hit them on their back and help break up some of the stuff in their lungs, but it's not going to have the same effect as that fetal ejection reflex. Our bodies are intuitive. Mother Nature is smart. And again, when we don't mess with it, we can have these really, really great things. So babies that are born through the vaginal canal with an intact perineum have less breathing and asthma issues going forward. And the other part of that is the fluids in the vaginal area that happen and get on baby as they're going through the vaginal canal. All of that is actually really beneficial to baby. So go figure, Mother Nature also would have that prepared and ready to go for us and for our babies. So it's good for them to get involved and in touch with that healthy bacteria on the way out, because it actually strengthens your baby's gut microbiome. And that's always, always a good thing. Now, when is it not safe? Let's talk about this for a moment. If you have had a prior uterine surgery like a myomectomy or hysterotomy, which I'm sure I said that incorrectly, a classical scar being a high vertical uterine incision, or an inverted T scar in the upper part of the uterus. A high BMI can also put moms at a lower chance of having a VBAC. Make sure if that's something that you're dealing with, though, that you find a provider that supports your current weight. High BMI on its own is not a reason to not attempt a VBAC. So definitely reach out to your provider about that. Now, what can you do to prepare your body for a VBAC? This is the fun part, because all of the stuff that I get to recommend to you here is all stuff that I've seen work over and over and over again. And so it's just fun to be a part of the conversation. But all of the things that we recommend for any vaginal birth or just birth in general definitely is what you want to start doing right now. That includes the 3 exercises. I will put the link for that in the show notes, but everything within those exercises, remember, it's to strengthen and all the stuff for your body, but it's also to get baby in a really good position for birth. And one of the best things that you can do to make sure that you're able to have a VBAC is to have that baby in a really good position for birth. It's going to be easier, more comfortable labor for you, but it's also going to leave you with less having to worry about, do we have to flip a breech baby? Are they in kind of like a posterior wonky position where I'm going to have some pain and labor is going to be a little bit harder and maybe they're going to have me on the clock? What are you up against? And all of that matters when it comes to your baby's position. So if you can get them in a good position early on, then much, much better for you. Things like evening primrose oil, red raspberry leaf tea, and dates. So all of the like labor prep things that you can do prior to getting closer to that 40-week due date, because a lot of providers are going to say, yes, you can try, right? Which red flag, anyways, different conversation. But you want to be careful about some of that red flag conversation that could come up, some of those things that are said. But they might say, oh, you can try, but if you get to your due date, then, for all these reasons, we need to make sure that we're talking induction. And hopefully that is not you. Hopefully you find a provider that we shouldn't be talking induction just because of that. As I said, my second was a VBAC, born at 41 weeks. Not once did my provider say anything to me about induction because I was a VBAC going over my guest date. So find a supportive provider. But these are some of the things that you can do to prep your body to get it moving and prepared to go into labor at a good time. And that's evening primrose oil that can be inserted vaginally. It can be taken orally. Red raspberry leaf tea can be drunk throughout your pregnancy, although if you notice any uterine activity, stall or pause, come back to it at 34 to 36 weeks. And dates, especially those like last 6 to 8 weeks of pregnancy, you can eat a couple of those a day and it's supposed to soften that cervix. But keep in mind, they are full of sugar, especially if you're dealing with gestational diabetes or if you're concerned about just raising insulin all the time. The more we learn about this, the less attracted I am to doing that. So, anyways, those are some things that you can do to prepare. And then I'm also going to tell you positive affirmations and some kind of meditation, whatever that looks like for you. It can be pre-recorded meditations. It can be something that you create and read to yourself. It can be more of like a spiritual prayer driven thing, but something that has you grounded and confident, especially as you're coming up to that labor, because even if you feel really confident the whole time during your pregnancy, as it gets closer, we can't help it. Sometimes it just comes back up where we're like, wait, maybe I don't feel so confident about this, or what if, we start with the what ifs. And so if that's you, if that does happen towards the end of your pregnancy or any time during pregnancy, I'll put it in the show notes as well, that find it and flip it exercise. I want you to use that. So if you've got a what if, that's a fear, and you're going to throw that on the left side of the paper, and then you're going to write two opposites positive on the other side. And you're going to start saying those positives out loud all day, every day until you start believing them. And it does work. It does. It's so powerful. So make sure that you're getting in the right headspace for the birth too, because especially when you are in that vulnerable state of labor, when it's go time, if a provider or a well-meaning nurse says something that makes you question if you're able to do this, or something about your body, or something about the safety of the baby, and you're not really headstrong, confident about what you're doing and trusting your intuition, it's really easy to get thrown off track. So I want you to be encouraged and empowered to hold strong and feel good about your course of action, so that you have those options during labor and even during pregnancy before. But make sure that you are preparing your mind just as much as your body. So here are my very best tips to have a successful VBAC, should you choose to go this route. Find a provider who supports you, not tolerates a VBAC. Supports, not tolerates. Make sure that your provider works at a hospital with low cesarean rates, or obviously out of hospital. Look into hiring a midwife in or out of hospital. Obviously, they tend to treat birth a little bit more like it's a normal process, and they're not looking for the what ifs of what could go wrong. We find that they do that a lot less. And midwives typically have higher rates for VBAC clients most of the time than most OBs. So that's something to ask questions about and look into. You can opt to birth at home rather than the hospital. That's totally an option. I always say, even if you are planning for the hospital, and I think that's great, wherever you feel comfortable is where you should be, I still recommend going and interviewing an out-of-hospital midwife. I think it might blow your mind, and you do not have to stay with them. I want you to hear what it sounds like and what it feels like to have somebody believe in your body and the process of birth. Just a different perspective. It'll blow your mind. But it'll have you leaving there like so confident, like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea that other people saw it this way. And it is a boost of confidence, 100%. You can aim for at least 18 months between pregnancies, but as I said, totally personal choice on that. Educate yourself about the risks and benefits, which you've done some of that today, obviously. Do not induce unnecessarily. So in other words, not just because we're coming up to a guest date. Even as a VBAC mom, that is not evidence-based care just next to a due date, coming up to a due date, talking about induction, not evidence-based care. And definitely make sure that they are not using a cervical ripener followed by oxytocin. That increases the risk of rupture. Hopefully, providers are going to act appropriately on that, but it's good information for you to have. Who knows? Maybe you get somebody on call that's not really paying attention to the chart or whatever. Just know that you are not going to do any cervical ripeners whatsoever. Don't use Pitocin to augment labor if at all possible. Allow your body to do its own thing. Do all of those natural augmenting techniques that you can. Hire a doula, because this person is on your team. And it's so awesome to have that third party when you start doing your what ifs in your head during that labor process to say, hey, you're doing great. Keep at it. It is so calming. Trust me. Trust the process and trust your intuition, because you are smart and your body knows best. And focus on those positive affirmations. As much as you can, process any negative emotions or memories from a prior traumatic birth. And the way that I just told you to do it was to use that find it and flip it affirmation thing. So when you're noticing those what ifs come in, or those random fears, or those random thoughts that are not your own and that are not welcome, and you do the positive affirmations, if that's not working, or you notice that it's a little heavier than that, then maybe reach out for some talk therapy or postpartum specialist, or someone that you trust, that you can kind of bounce those off and then work through them. You definitely need to get them out of your head though, because if they're allowed to sit in there, it will get worse and worse, and they'll get stronger and stronger, and they don't deserve that kind of power. So you got to say it out loud. You got to get it out of your head, write it on something, burn it, throw it away, whatever you got to do, but get it out. And don't trust the VBAC calculator. If your provider, that's like your first red flag. I'll give you 2 quick red flags. If your provider, maybe let's just go over a couple of them because they're coming to my mind right now. If your provider is using a VBAC calculator, ditch that provider. No good. If your provider is saying we're going to do a TOLAC or a trial of labor after cesarean, we'll let you try and pay attention to how they're using that, because sometimes TOLAC is just another medical term that they're using. Sometimes it's because it's really about the try part. Like we'll try and we'll see how it goes. If they have really high cesarean rates, or if they have high VBAC, cesareans for VBAC mom rates. So like you would ask them, like, how often do your VBAC moms like end up going forward and having a vaginal birth, or how many end up giving births by cesarean? Can you tell me those numbers? Depending on their numbers, that would be it. Also, if they deliver or work at a hospital that has high cesarean rates, there are policies and stuff at hospitals and insurance and all kinds of stuff that we're not privy to that exists in the background that dictates a lot of what happens in the birth setting at those locations. So that is definitely something for you to look into. So there's a couple of red flags for you guys. Otherwise, it really is about the intuition, right? Like, you know, when you're working with somebody, when you're talking to somebody, that didn't feel right. Or I don't know that I trust, even though he said this, I don't know that I trust that that's what he's going to do in that situation. You guys, you know best. Trust that intuition that you're getting. I do think before we leave here, it's important for me to say it again so that you hear it again, that it is less riskier for mom and baby to have a vaginal birth after cesarean than it is to have a repeat cesarean. So know your rights, know the truth, get all of the evidence on your side before moving forward with your VBAC. Understand that you can refuse any test or any procedure or any exam at any time, and that you are in charge of your birth space. This is huge. And I think as a VBAC mom, if this is you've had a cesarean before, my guess is you're probably working on finding your voice right now, or you have some of that built up from your prior experience where you're like, this was the experience I had for whatever the reason, whether it was completely necessary. In my case, I believe it was unnecessary, or you had a breech baby or whatever the case. Use that to kind of stand on and find your voice, which I think we do as moms. Every pregnancy, I think we get a little bit better at that. So definitely use it as your step stool into advocating for the birth that you absolutely want. And know that we are over here cheering you on at My Essential Birth. If you are a VBAC mom, reach out to me. I, in every way, want to be able to support you. Ask questions. Like, let me be one of those people that you utilize in your circle to be able to get the things that you need. Because I have a little bit of experience. And then also surround yourself with people who believe in birth, like not just me, right? Other people, your friends, your family, whoever you can reach out to, your birth support is going to be huge as you go forward. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode all about, yes, you can have a VBAC, and yes, it is safe for you to do. And with that, I will see you next week. If you loved what you heard today, the very best way to support this podcast and help other moms to find it is to leave a quick review. I read one at the beginning of the episodes, and I would love for yours to be next. And if you're ready for even more pregnancy, birth, and postpartum goodness, come join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I will hold your hand and walk you through pregnancy and birth step by step so you're totally prepared for a birth you'll love. See you next week.